If you're going to work in comms, especially today, you really have to show how it's driving the business. It could be a reputation, but I've always set up ways to track in previous roles and current roles how our owned platforms are directly impacting, whether it's a transaction, a call to a call center. But it takes a lot of discipline and effort around the enterprise to do that.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Signal in the Noise. I'm your host, Dan Gaynor, and today we sat down with Rob Melstein, Lead Director of Corporate and Digital Communications at CVS Health, breaking down the powerful role communications play in driving real, measurable business results. In this episode, Rob shared a ton of interesting and tangible insights, including the importance of understanding what you want to say, who's searching for it online, and the user journey across the digital ecosystem. All of this adding up to an impact on corporate reputation that can be tied to real business ROI. He dives into a really tangible understanding of how you can create a one-to-one correlation between a communications effort, such as messaging, editorial, investor relations, executive comms, and corporate reputation, why that's all critical for success in gathering buy-in and budget from C-suites around the company. And lastly, how you can bring together qualitative data like surveys and quantitative data like media to prove the impact of your communications efforts in a holistic way. This is a must listen for anyone looking to tie communications directly to business outcomes and elevate their strategy, bringing together multiple functions from comms to marketing, from HR to finance to operations. So buckle up for a fascinating episode with one of the most innovative folks in comms tech at one of the biggest companies on the planet. Here's another great episode of Signal in the Noise. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Signal in the Noise. I'm your host, Dan Gaynor, leading insights here at Signal AI, and I am thrilled to have on my friend Rob Melstein. Rob, where do we find you today?
You find me about 30 miles north of New York City in a town called Ossining.
Fabulous. And how often are you transiting between New York versus Woonsocket, Rhode Island, which I believe is the headquarters?
You've got it right. I've been there a few times. I don't have any team members that close to the office. I have someone in Rhode Island comes into Woonsocket. I have someone in Nevada. I have someone in Minnesota. So with that said, get up there occasionally for group meetings.
Well, you've got a big job. You're the lead director for corporate comms and digital comms at CVS Health. And I think it's worth explaining what CVS actually is because we all have our own anecdotal experiences with it. As of 2023, revenues for the company were like over $320 billion, probably much bigger this year. It's got a few key segments. It's obviously got the pharmacy, which anybody sort of anywhere in America would know, getting a wide range of merchandise and prescriptions. You've also got CVS Caremark, which is the leading pharmacy benefits manager, the mail order pharmacy, that kind of thing. And then you've got Aetna, the health insurance provider, variety of plans, medical, dental, pharmaceutical, you name it. It's this really fascinating, huge, integrated healthcare company. I wanted to talk a little bit about your career arc, how you ended up there, what you're doing there now, what you envision as the function of the future. But let's start with maybe not all the way back to birth, but a little bit around your journey. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up in such a cool role at such a big company.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So it's interesting because it sounds cliche, but if you'd asked me even 10 years ago, 12 years ago, if I'd be doing this, I would have said, what? No way. So I started off when I was a lot younger. I started off wanting to be a sports broadcaster. Wanted to be on air and had some favorites that I followed in the industry. One guy named Warner Wolf, who is now retired in Florida, sport broadcaster here, local CBS affiliate. And so I wanted to do that role. I wanted to bring the sports, all those fun highlights. Decided at some point I didn't want to be on air. I said, no, and plus it was certainly arguably harder at that time because you had to go to small market. You couldn't have a podcast, for example, be discovered and then boom, you got a show. So that's the early stages. I majored in business management at Binghamton University, state school here in New York, but I always still had that TV dream. So after I graduated, I had done some internships. And after I graduated, I literally got access back to, again, probably wouldn't happen nowadays, but one of the buildings I worked in, and said, hey, remember me? Like, oh yeah, come on in. Why don't you go talk to so-and-so? They're hiring. Like there was no monster.com even at the time, put a job listing up. And so I walked into someone's office with permission, said, hi, I'm Rob. I interned here last summer. I'd like to get a job. They said, okay, can you start tomorrow? And I said, well, this was a Thursday, can't start tomorrow. I'll come in on Monday. So that brings us to the TV career. So I ended up as a production assistant on a show and then bounced around to a couple of places. Ended up as a writer, producer, ended up finally as a head writer for one of CNN shows, a show called Showbiz Tonight, entertainment news program. But I was writing and producing segments, a very interesting environment, which does pertain a lot to my role now, where you had to switch on a dime very quickly. There were days we'd have a show stacked up, as they call it, ready to go, and then boom, 20 minutes before air, sorry, something else happened, and they would call it blow up the show. And you'd have to literally change everything. So my brain was wired very much for that kind of organized chaos for many years. Towards the end of my TV career, I transitioned into a role that was sort of an intermediary between business and sales and editorial. They called it strategic content. Essentially, it was the early days of branded content. And so sales wanted to sell everything on air and online. The editorial folks didn't want to sell a thing, right? Keep editorial purity. And I sort of was like peacemaker in the middle, kind of like, okay, we've run a business here, but understand we don't want to bleed into editorial purity as well. So that I found very interesting. It brought into marketing and PR, which is going to get to some of the stuff that I did post that role. And then about, 13 years ago, I got out of it. I wanted to get out of that business, the TV business, the digital business, but I was working on digital sites there as well. So that kind of will transition us here. And I was able to get a job at a telecommunications company, specifically Charter Communications, with the go-to-market brand of Spectrum, phone, internet, cable services. And I was very fortunate. So I came out of TV and went what they say sometimes affectionately to the dark side of comms and PR. But I knew that there was going to be a learning curve. A lot of TV folks would be like, well, I can just get out of it and go to that side of the house because I've been on this side of the house. And I knew that it wasn't going to be that easy. So fortunately, CCO there took a chance on me, brought me and said, look, I can teach you the comms piece, the corporate stuff. Because remember, I hadn't even used things like Outlook that much. Certainly not project management tools. Like when I worked in TV, one time I put an Outlook meeting on my boss's calendar and he's like, what are you doing? You don't do that. So I had to learn all that corporate stuff, right? And then come in.
Well, no, I think it's fascinating. It's almost like you describing coming out of TV, like Tarzan reacclimating to society. How dare you throw a meeting on my calendar? So no, I think this is super interesting and feel free to belabor it. But you come from some of the most notable organizations, CNN, I think also CNBC. You go to this gigantic company that's Charter. Tell me a little bit about, what it was like to take some of the jujitsu you had learned trial by fire and bring it into I'm stewarding corporate reputation.
Exactly. So I was brought in to stand up digital platforms at Charter for the comms function. They didn't exist. And then so again, very grateful. I still stay in touch with my former boss, CCO there, and took a chance. Who's this guy coming on TV? He's got some experience, but no. I want you to do, Rob, I like your digital stuff. I'll teach you the other stuff. But I was doing things aside from digital, Charter. We eventually acquired Time Warner Cable, and I was able to eventually form an in-house content team with videographers, editors, designers, which, by the way, is still in place, and the corporate website, which we built from scratch. So we had the platform and we had the production team to spearhead that content. But prior to that, Charter was 25,000 employees. We ended up acquiring Time Warner Cable in 2016, quadrupled the size of our name. We went from 25,000 employees to 100,000. So all that M&A stuff, change comms, all that. But before we did that, I was doing the digital work, but I also would do things I would do media relations and give statements and things on background. So I got a bit of that grounding too, because, we had a small staff. And then I actually ran corporate social responsibility there for a couple of years. I joke I was sort of voluntold to do it because we didn't have an enterprise CSR program. I knew nothing about CSR. And so I got that experience too, not just from the comm side. I'm talking about like, okay, we're going to have employees in Billings, Montana on a Saturday morning rebuild homes. How much coffee and donuts do we need so the employees, are comfortable? What do we need to help partner with a nonprofit to do this? What are our KPIs? What's the reputation lift here? So that was great. So at Charter, I got to do owned content. And the last piece of that before we can, if you want to fast forward to now and a couple other stops along the way was, this is a sort of key point, I think, my opinion only. When you're a comms function, you don't have a P&L usually. You're a cost center. You don't have a quota to hit sales targets. Okay, good and bad at that. My theory has always been when you spending the company's money, you're going to go into the CFO and ask for budget. To me, if you can show how comms is going to drive the business directly, not a bad place to be, right? So I tell the story that everything that we did at Charter, from the own content, social content, digital platform, I put on my whiteboard, I wrote one message: to do today, sell more cable. Why did I put that on there? Well, because our CEO used to say, well, there's nothing can't be solved by selling a little bit more cable.
It's the famous phrase in startup land, there's no problem that more revenue won't solve.
Exactly. And so you could debate, sure, comms should work towards reputation. We can get into that. But if you can align comms, and we're able to do it, like no knock against tier ones and my media relations friends. If you get a New York Times placement, a journal placement, great. Like I started, in the days where, right, people were cutting out headlines from clipbooks, putting it together, putting it to the CCS CEO's desk. Look what we did today. But the Times, Journal, all the tier ones, tier twos, they maybe will link back to your own platforms if you ask a reporter nicely. But 9 times out of 10, they may not. And they're not going to give you the data on like, okay, well, what did this placement do? So getting to your question, by the way, about AI, I do think AI can really help, like, again, opinion only, sort of say, okay, what does all this effort, tactical stuff, what does it actually mean? Like, not, you could get impressions and other vanity metrics, sure, they're nice, but is it moving the business? So point being is that own platforms, you can track. You can track from a social click to a website click, back to here, over there. And then, if they go online and buy cable or buy shampoo, and you can, now I'm putting on the marketing, right? I'm using my marketing terms. We can get that mid and lower funnel, comms like, okay, funnel, right? Well, but we're not marketing it yet, but you should partner with them. So we could get mid and lower funnel, and you could go in there and show that comms is working it and helping to move the business. I can't imagine any C-suite, just like you reiterated, when you're a startup, can't solve most problems without getting more revenue. It solves a lot of problems. Then that's not a bad thing. So I'll pause there for a second so you can get in any other questions. But that's sort of my theory. If you're going to work in comms, especially today, you really have to show how it's driving the business. It could be a reputation, but I've always set up ways to track in previous roles and current roles how our owned platforms are directly impacting, whether it's a transaction, a call to a call center. But it takes a lot of discipline and effort around the enterprise to do that.
Well, that's the big reason that we even initially connected, because I think you're like a real innovator in this space. And for the longest time, communicators have walked into a room and said, look at my great article. And sales can say, well, did you drive 35% growth? And marketing said, can you look at the leads we've generated? And operations can say, look at the efficiencies we've driven. HR can say, here's the amount of hires we've made. And for the longest time, comms has been unmeasurable, or it hasn't had the folks like you to connect comms to real business outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about how you're doing that right now, and then extrapolate out to core principles. Tell me about how in your current gig at, what is it, a Fortune 10 company? I don't even know where it ranks in the Fortune 500, but it's definitely above 50. You're doing that in a really sophisticated way. Tell me about what it means to be, lead director for corporate comms and digital comms.
And thank you, by the way. You're giving me way too much credit. I mean, this to me is not, it's innovative maybe in the way that, I don't like to throw out that term, but it's innovative in the way of trying to get comms to think like this. And, through various trade groups and societies we might be part of, like there's a lot of discussion. And so I don't know, if it's really filled, like, we talked when I was dealing with marketing, even prior to the start of this podcast today, and we've had discussion with them on various projects, and, they're day in, day out. They're looking at pages, thousands of things. So, you're looking at the SEO, you're looking at everything that comes in, and like, okay, well, this is working, this is not, and you can build multiple versions of site and social content. And as you should, now you're limited by budgets and staffing, but the marketing folks are doing different versions of pages, making adjustments, changing titles, moving stuff up and down. Okay, this is working, this is not, do more of this and do that. So that's what we try to do, and I've tried to do in all my roles, and yes, this one as well. So what do? Corporate reputation, brand site, enterprise, as you indicated at the top of the call, we're vertically integrated. We got a lot of pieces of the company. We got retail, we got insurance, we got a pharmacy benefit manager. This is the enterprise site that tells that story. So what did we do? Day one, I said, well, let's do some SEO research. Doesn't have to be, a ton, but we need to see how users are coming to the site. And so to me, if I had, and I'm not a good artist, but if I had a little whiteboard, I would say, here's what a company wants to say. Here's how users are searching for you, whether it's chatbots and AI, search engines, and the best place is to be right in that middle. Because if you say what you want to say and no one's searching for you that way, the tree falls in the forest, right? No one's going to find your stuff. So you want to intersect that. So that's what we do. So on any piece of content we do in the site, for the most part, we do an SEO brief. So again, marketing, was not Rob Melstein's idea. That's something when I worked the marketing teams. On that side, I was like, everything was briefed out. Everything was researched. There was not a piece of content, a site build that was not either on the big level SEO'd or on the individual piece of the content. So it took a lot of time, and admittedly, same thing at Charter, to give insight, this is what we need to do. Now, certain pieces of content, we tend not to go too hard on the SEO, like for instance, press releases in general. This is not trade secret. Those have different approvals. Sometimes those need to get out faster. But anything that kind of like an article, we research it. And we do the research on the social side too. I don't oversee social, but they're on the same team. And then so we can see social trends. So that's one concrete thing to do. We SEO everything we can to see what the intersection is between what we're saying and what users are searching. So we do that. And then we create the content, we do editorial, we match it with the SEO inputs, and we post and we track. And it could be a series of articles, it could be, it could be podcasts, it could be videos. All those things are crawled by the search engine. So the key is those to get, and it's not just keywords, there's backlinking strategy. Again, all our things we borrowed from our marketing friends that do day in and day out. So that's how we approach content on the site. We SEO it, we blend the editorial with the technical inputs, we measure and wash, rinse, and repeat. And just like, again, borrowing sort of what I've done on the digital side of teams, we need to make sure we've got, what are our KPIs and goals? So that's one thing. The other thing, and this is where it gets a little trickier, is going back to the measuring the business impact. So what we also do, we put campaign tracking codes on all of our content. So if it's an article about, CVS pharmacy and thought leadership, and we link to the CVS pharmacy site, we put a tracking code on that. So the CVS.com folks can say, hey, in their dashboard, hey, you drove this over here, and here's what everyone's doing over here, right? That gets us our, again, marketing hat, multi-touch attribution. And that gets credit, if you will, back to comms. Not credit for credit's sake, but to show, again, we're driving the business. That's very tactically a couple of things that we do. And then now you get to the reputation. So here's where it gets interesting, because reputation, there's a lot of trackers, there's a lot of gizmos and things, and, they all do a relatively okay, decent job of reputation. But to me, you really, again, opinion only, I would recommend plugging in all this own content directly into the reputation tracker, but not only the own stuff, right? The media relations piece, the internal pieces, right into the reputation. So you can try to get as best as you can, and I'm always going to try, even though it may not be doable, a one-to-one correlation between a tactic or a campaign. Is it moving the reputation of the company, which of course is a big comms goal? If it is, great, do more of that. If not, assess it and do something else. So long-winded answer is we tactically, we SEO things. We blend the editorial with the SEO. We put tracking on things to measure, is it driving to other parts of the more lower mid-funnel sites of the company? And we also try to think about ways that we can tie this all into reputation. I think if we can do all that, you have tangible things to go up to your CCO and C-suite and showing how comms is helping to move the business.
I mean, okay, this is like an absolute gold mine of an answer because it's so tangible. And I just want to say thank you so much for going into that level of detail. So often comms folks are high level, we track business outcomes. No, you're being very clear. We are going to first make sure that people can find us. Second, make sure that we're able to track the flow of a user from engaging with a piece of content all the way through, ordering toothpaste on our site. And then lastly, we're going to connect it to two sorts of outcomes. Business outcomes, which is, of course, like attribution for leads, but more importantly on the reputation side. And since I'm super in on the reputation side, started a business around it, as you know, let's talk about that. What is your reputation tracker, so to speak, to the degree that you're able to share it? And how does the sort of performance metrics you talked about with regard to generating leads and showing the flow through the digital ecosystem connect to some of the broader reputational forces, such as, like marketing campaign performance, let alone executive commentary, let alone that big piece on CNBC about the latest quarterly earnings? How do you bring all the data points together into a cohesive universe that you can measure?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can't get into too much detail, right, of who we use, but the players out there, right? They might have a panel of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 sample size that they ping. Maybe there's consumers, maybe investors, government officials. You can assemble these models on how you best do, whether it's marketing or comms or another function using it. And then they kind of come in, whether, it could be monthly, it could be more likely quarterly on, okay, you were up on this, you were down on this, you're flat on this. Here are some reasons why you might do that. The tricky part is where I would say, again, humble opinion of one, is okay, when they ping their sample size of their surveys, I always would ask, it may or may not be doable, but I would say, great, can you put, again, I've done some survey design, not for reputation, for other things, right, how these kind of work. It's like, okay, ask this question. If yes, do this. If no, do that. So if you're saying, how do you feel about company X around their efforts to bring, it could be community health. If you go to charter, it could be, helping others get wired up. And if the answer is oh yeah, we like it. Great. Okay. What led you to that? Have you seen okay, these efforts on a website? Was it on a TV show, a news show program? Did you listen to this podcast? To me, the value of the data are when you are able to make that one-to-one correlation. Again, not easy to do. And by the way, you might get an answer you don't like. You might say oh, I didn't see any of this stuff for all. I know, bias towards own platforms. I didn't see any of it. So sorry. I'm okay, well, does that mean we stop doing own content? I would obviously say no. But I think that's the way to do it. So you try to get not only the own pieces in there, but can you get your media relations effort? Did you see the New York Times piece? What did you think about it? Did you read the journal? Did you see on a local news station an employee talking about a topic that might have been placed there? And then the internal comms piece, don't forget about this too, because I've worked on some internal content as well, over my experience. Internal comms to me, is what are those KPIs and can you plug that in too? Because your employees will, often be your biggest advocates, but they also be detractors if they're not happy. So what can you do from the internal comms piece? Are your KPIs employee retention or trying to get employees to advocate for others to come work for the company? Could it be that? Or employee satisfaction surveys? So the long way to answer your question, Dan, is try to get all these pieces that are kind of like a stew, you can call it, all these things that are swirling that comms is working on, maybe sometimes partnership with marketing that you're working on, and then plug them in to whatever your tracking system is. And then again, wash, rinse, repeat based on the outcome. But the tricky part is plugging all that in. You've got a lot of tactics, a lot of KPIs. You've got to, of course, think about investors as well, right? Your government relation partners, your HR teams for talent acquisition. You got to plug all that in. But if you can do it, you'll be able to at least see what's working and what's not, and do more ideally what's working and pivot for things that may not be.
Well, you can't talk about information overload, which is basically what you're talking about, and information integration, and by the way, insights generation, without talking about AI. And I'm mindful that you work in a big healthcare company, which from a data standpoint, you've got to tread probably more carefully than any kind of industry in the world. So how are you experimenting with AI? What are the sort of sandboxes that you're able to play with? And how importantly, to your point around unifying disparate data points, are you finding AI is a partner to you in distilling huge volumes of information into actionable insights?
Yeah, so we've dabbled in content creation. Again, I don't think that's going to come as a shock. I mean, there's other parts of the business doing more innovative and interesting things with AI as well that, obviously I can't necessarily speak to specifically. But yeah, we've used some of the AI tools around content creation, where I do think there's a value here. Again, goes back to this communication analytics piece. Can you scrape? There's always in there. Let's see. When I worked at CNBC, we were using like sentiment trackers to help figure out whether sentiment can predict purchase intent. Right, really valuable. Like if you're an investor and you could say, okay, there's a big line at Walmart, and that means people are buying stuff at Walmart, but not over here. Maybe that moves the needle on sales, which moves the needle potentially in stock price. So that was very early on. I love that use, but it's like what's old is new again, because I think what you can use it, and maybe, question back to you is, you're the AI expert, not me. So from my end, like I would love to see, yes, content creation, but this stew, this soup that I talked about, whatever you want to call it, we've got all these things, these tactics, these campaigns, efforts, and try to plug that into something that gives you an answer of, here's where you are, here's what's working, here's what's not, here's what to do more of, here's what to do less of. To me, I would almost throw that question back to you is, how can AI help with that and do it in an ongoing manner, to me, in real time? You can get all dashboardy tableaus, you can talk about all those fun things, but to me, it should be a real-time view. Again, just like marketing, they've got real-time views. So why shouldn't comms have that? Because as we know, things move very quickly nowadays in terms of the world of communications.
Well, I appreciate you throwing the question back at me. I mean, without turning this into a demo of what we're up to, I would say that's possible, right? Which is the question that vexed me when I was at Nike or at Weber Shandwick was, can you use AI to shape, measure, and optimize strategy, not just create content? And I think we're getting there, right? I mean, ideally, if you've got a diversified enough data ecosystem, earned, owned, paid, campaign, stakeholders, you name it, where you can integrate both asking human being stuff, you mentioned survey-based tools, as well as real-time media ingestion. So that's, social, earned, podcast, TV, you name it, plus stuff like on the dark web. You should have like a pretty diverse ecosystem to start with. Then you need to use an AI system that can tag everything, right? So here we look at like entities, whether that's a person or a company, as well as a business unit or a product. And then we look at a variety of things that go into topics. So, and training your topics to be super particular to your corporate narrative. You run all that through a scoring system, and you should be able to have dashboards and insights reports that are reflective of real-time movement, kind of like a stock ticker. Now, of course, I'd counsel anybody like not looking at your day-to-day swings in reputation unless you're totally in a crisis swirl. But nonetheless, it is for the first time possible. And I think that's really cool. We're almost up at time. And speaking of the art of the possible, Rob, I wanted to ask you, as somebody who's worked on the production side of the equation and the big corporation side of the equation, as somebody who's gone from being like a TV writer and producer to the guy who's transforming comms into like a measurable ROI metric for a large Fortune 50 company, I would be interested in your take on what the comms function of the future looks like. You mentioned being able to integrate metrics and stand more apples to apples, toe to toe, shoulder to shoulder, whatever you want to say, with the marketing teams of the world or the sales teams in terms of being able to track business impact, if you were just a regular executive listening into this podcast, what would be some general tenets, some general areas of exploration, and some general change management tools that you would think about deploying if you were building a comms function from scratch?
That's a good one and a tough one, because it all comes down to the nuts and bolts of getting those on boards and implementation. So what I've always tried to do, I'll try to answer that question of what I try to do personally. We are call us like a center of excellence, right? Where we are, right? Own content center of excellence. We're not officially that, but essentially it kind of what it is. When you're in that role, to me, you got to make the stakeholders feel like you're helping them meet their goals every day. So when someone comes to us with a thing, we say, well, what are you trying to solve for? Okay, we're trying to solve for this. I mean, you could always say it's laddering up to reputation or sales, ideally, or marketing. And by the way, you could track all these things. Try to be very disciplined project manager, which we didn't get into, which gets a little wonky, but you always want to kind of track okay, what is the goal of this? Is it for this topic? Is it for this theme, right? Because you can pull that all the way through in your reporting as you put it into sort of the tracking, as we talked about. But the way I would position it in any level of the company is this is going to help you do your stuff better and less sort of kind of make a best guess. You're going to actually have data, concrete, quantitative as much as you can, to show what you're doing is working or is not working towards your goals. And to me, if you're an executive, that's okay. I would say it's the old tenet. It's if you're going to fail quickly and then go in another direction potentially. Now, right, caveat is you're in crisis. There are going to be different things. You've got SEC regulations. So there's always going to be things you're going to need to do, regardless if they're going to have a measurable quantitative impact. But to me, I would always try to position what we've just talked about today, this will help you with your goals. And I guess, again, if you're going to an executive and you can pull out of your virtual pocket numbers, you're in front of a CFO, you're in front of a CEO, anything with a C in front of it or an E in front of it. How can they say that's a bad thing? I mean, that's going to have a measurable business impact, because that C-suite goal is, you have fiduciary responsibility too, right? You have to act in the best interest of shareholders, for better or for worse. So that's going to help you make good business decisions, and it's going to help quantify communications. And that, to me, has always been the challenge, right? You have sentiment, you have other trackers. I'll never walk into a presentation, by the way, with impressions. I'll never do that. I'll never do. If you want impressions from me, it's not going to tell you anything. It's a big number. So back to try to put the bow on your question is, the change management is challenging because we've come from a very tactical standpoint in comms for many, many years. Something happens, respond to it. Let's try to get out of ahead and focus on the tactics versus okay, are the tactics really working? Are they quantifiable? Are they moving the business? Are they moving reputation? And then, so to your point, you have the technology now that I think you can do that. And to me, I'm always going to try to push to that one-to-one measuring metric. If you can. If you can't, then you back it up. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but it comes down to, again, what can you do to help that person, that team meet their goals? And if you position like that, I think they're more likely to come on board with you versus kind of the other way, saying, okay, do this because to do this. No, you're going to help them meet what they need to do and have numbers to prove it.
I definitely think it answers my question, probably in one of the most tangible ways I've heard. And what I'm gathering, which is sort of a call to arms, if you will, is being courageous enough to ask, is this possible? Can we hold ourselves to a higher standard? So often in our world, there's this reluctance. Oh no, what we do evades measurement, yet is highly important, which I should start using in my own household when I talk about my contributions to laundry and trash and things like that, as opposed to, childcare and keeping a car running. And I think it's very, very important to continue in this era of technological explosiveness to ask the question, not can AI automate my job, but can AI better integrate the data universe around us so that I'm just simply executing better regardless of what I'm putting out, from a press release to a marketing campaign to an investor relations moment, you name it. And I think you're at the forefront of that. But thank you so much for sharing some wise words, for sharing a very cool career arc. And I presume if folks want to get in touch with you, they can hit you up on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the only Robert Melstein with an Melstein on there. So you can find me there. And always happy to talk about this topic. It's, as you can tell, try to stay passionate about it and would love to connect with others who are trying, again, measure the quantitative value of comms day in and day out. So thanks for having me.
Well, fabulous. Shout out to the Page Society for linking us up. Thanks so much again to Rob Melstein from CVS Health for coming on the Signal in the Noise podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.